This is the session on predictability, and predictability truly is the fulcrum for scale, to scale your business. So we are rejoined by Charles today. So if you were here for the keynote, Charles is the researcher that did this whole program that we've based everything today on. So thank you for coming back and
you're welcome.
talking again. And then JB Kellogg from Madwire. So predictability is about creating enterprise value. And we're going to talk about that and why it's so important for that. We're going to focus in this session on, are your decision makers continuously learning? What's interesting, and what Charles was saying in the keynote, is that the best predictor of future growth of a business is not how fast it grew in the past, but how consistent that growth was. And so we're looking for consistency and predictability over time, and that consistent growth requires data, feedback, and realistic targets. But that predictability can actually reduce and almost eliminate uncertainty in the business, which is what we all want. So I'm going to introduce Charles again. Some of you already know him from the keynote, but in case you weren't here, Charles is amazing. I had the good luck of getting to hear him present a year ago when he first was kind of doing the secret presentations about the research.
Before we could announce it,
yeah, it was still under embargo, so I couldn't write about it. I kept calling him. I'm like, can I write about it yet? Can I write about it yet? So he has also built and sold 3 companies, created over $200 million in enterprise value with those companies. Did I say 2? 3 companies. And then he founded with his daughter TrueSpace, and 6 years ago where they embarked on a research program. I'm not going to talk a lot about that right now because we want to get into this session, but if you have questions about this program, I would really strongly encourage you to stick around for the networking hour after Penn Street's keynote today, because Charles will be here and be able to answer questions about this. This research is absolutely groundbreaking. So, TrueSpace also is growing quickly and will do over 2 million this year. JB Kellogg is one of our most successful entrepreneurs in Fort Collins. So he and his father co-founded Madwire, and that's a marketing company. It's a platform and services company here in Fort Collins. They provide marketing for small businesses. They have over 20,000 active paid subscribers. And interestingly, they've got over 4,000 online reviews with an average rating of 4.7 stars. That's pretty impressive. JB is passionate about continual growth and predictable growth. And as a consequence, they have made the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing companies 7 years in a row. That is unheard of. They're now doing about 110 million run rate with 600 employees in the Fort Collins area. So definitely one of our major job creators here. Thank you guys for joining.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah.
So, right? I know, right? So what we're talking about here are decision makers continuously learning. Charles, I want to start with, why does predictability even matter?
Well, it's the only thing that matters. So those of you that listen to our keynote, but those of you weren't there, we've done a 6-year study on helping businesses that are stuck between 2 and 10 figure out how to get the 10 into the middle markets. And one of our discoveries, we've had a lot of really interesting discoveries over this term, is how do we actually substantiate the concept of scale and growth? And I want you to really think about this for a second, because we talk about growth as if everybody knows what that means. Right? So, we're growing. Well, I have no idea what that means. And scale is the other one that's completely ambiguous. Scale isn't getting bigger. Scale is actually having less input with greater output. It's a productivity idea. So we keep preaching, and I look at people like Andrew Hendrickson and others who we've been working with for a while. The job of a CEO, if you're in this zone, to try to reach the middle markets, and JB, of course, has well surpassed this, but your job is to develop the capacity to become predictable. Predictability is what really enables growth. That's what helps define growth, is being predictable on a year-over-year basis. It doesn't mean predictable at 100% a year. It means being able to actually look at the assumptions around your business, look at what your business is teaching you, and then using those trends and those assumptions to determine what the quarters and the year looks like. So my belief is, in the research that Jamie and I have done, if there's one thing you can do as a leader in your business, if you're trying to get to the middle markets, is to work at building your capacity to be predictable. The rest will follow, because it's the unpredictable businesses that can't fund themselves because they overshot. Mm-hmm. They can't attract talent because they're horrible places to work. Be predictable and you'll start growing. So that's why this is such an important session for us today.
Thank you. Thank you. So when you were starting your businesses, so you can pick which business you want to go with, Madwire, obviously. When you were getting started, what assumptions did you start with before you knew how to predict? And before you had enough volume to actually look at your KPIs from the past?
Well, we kept it pretty simple initially. We spent a lot of time researching what we were going to offer, and by a lot of time, like 3 months. And we came up with our price points of what we thought would be competitive. And
did you do research to get there, or did you
a little bit? Yeah, discovery. But we came up with what we felt that was a compelling offer. And so that was an assumption that we could even sell at that price point. Mm-hmm. And then we did some assumptions around what our lead cost would be. So how much is it going to cost us to get leads? We had an assumption there.
How did you arrive at that?
Kind of a guess. We threw $100 out there to get a lead. So we were just assuming we could get leads for that at that point in time. We actually came in a little under that one, which was good. And we made some assumptions on our closing rate. So of the leads that we received, how many would we close? And we assumed 20%. So we knew if we closed 20% and the average price point, if that was on target, based on how much money we put into marketing, how many leads would we get and how many leads would we close based on assumptions, what would the revenue be? And then we made an assumption on churn, because we're a reoccurring revenue business. So we assumed okay, well, these are small businesses that we work with, so churn would be a little bit higher probably. So we made some assumptions there, and now you have essentially your math equation. We call it the marketing math, but that's essentially your math equation. And what we always say at Madwire is, if that's really fine-tuned, it's almost a mathematical certainty that you'll hit your goal if that's right, But initially, you don't know what that's going to be, so you just start running it. And then every month, you take your actuals and you put those next to the assumptions, right? And you tweak it. Mm-hmm. So over the course of time, you really start to fine-tune it. So after about a year, it's very dialed in to where I need this much leads, which is going to cost this much, which is going to open this many accounts, which is going to be this much revenue. This is how much we're going to lose from churn, so this is what the difference is. So that's what we're growing at. And that's what we started with. So initially, our projections was just a very nice small little spreadsheet with 10 columns. And now it's I can't even find my way in there. It's 100 columns this way, 5,000 rows deep, because now it's just down to every individual role and compensation for that role. And, so it's very complex now, which is, I think Matt Bryson's talking later, our CFO. Mm-hmm. So yeah, he can talk to that in much more depth now. But the initial projections was literally a spreadsheet with 10 columns, very simple. And we just built off of that.
When you described that spreadsheet, the big one that you have now, his propeller started turning.
Yeah.
I verklempt a little bit.
Right. Yeah.
That's exciting. Yes. No, when you speak about that, I think I'll answer your question, but I want to address it this way maybe. Think for a minute. Just close your eyes and think. What's your year-end goal for revenues? Just think for 1 second. And then ask yourself this question. Do I have enough leads to meet that goal? Not sales, but leads. It starts there for predictability. So let me tell you what I mean by that. And if you can't answer that question, you'll never be predictable. So marketing math, I'm going to steal that because I just love that. We call it lead dynamics. But the predictability starts with the interaction between you and the customer and understanding that customer. Not the one you have, but the one you need to grow, the one that's in your forecast, right? So we start looking businesses at what does it cost to go find one of those leads, to actually acquire that lead? What's the cost there? How much time does it take to find that lead? Those are really important pieces of the business that you have to know if you're going to scale a business. Then how long does it actually take you to convert the lead to a close? And last but not least is how many of those do you actually close, what percentage? And it's pretty simple mathematics. I love the marketing math, but you can go back and say, I need 600 leads to get basically X number of deals over a certain period of time in order to meet my forecast this year. So what we saw, Candace, when we were doing the final work of this, the companies that were predictable had a completely different signature, and I'm sure yours is this way. That's why I've kind of reflected about this, because it's like a case study. The sales meetings that Jamie and I would attend for businesses that were stuck and weren't growing, they would always focus on the last few handful of deals that were about to close. Most of their conversations are, when's it going to close such and such deal? Where is it in the pipeline? Is it in legal? Is it about, you're about ready to close this deal? Even if you're in a consumer market, it's the same conversations we saw. And they're focusing on the end of the game. And they might even close a couple of those deals, but as you and I both know from businesses we've watched, because you serve the same business as I do, they blow into the next quarter and the next quarter, and they're the same set of deals, and you closed a couple of them. That's when you're stuck. The businesses that are predictable they know going in that the deals are going to close almost on a cycle that they've seen time and again, because customers will make a decision when they're ready to make a decision. Not on your timeline, but on their timeline. So the only thing you have control over is that interaction of having enough leads and understanding how many leads you've generated that week or that month or that quarter that are going to fall into that natural zone that you know now that turn into sales. So that's the thing that we started seeing in companies that were growing at your rate and becoming predictable, is they managed the top end of the process. The bottom was going to happen in almost a natural form depending on the type of business that you're in. So, I mean, it's really an important part of the mathematics of the business if you're going to become predictable. And literally the signature of being unpredictable is managing all the stuff at the end item. The last few deals in the pipeline are so important, and the CEO spends all his or her time there. Those are unpredictable businesses. So.
Elephant hunters are also unpredictable. Yeah. So we use the metaphors of you can hunt for mice, little tiny deals, rabbits, antelopes, or elephants. And you've got elephant hunters out there. Every sales team has them. You know that, if they kill that elephant, the village is going to eat for a year. But if they don't kill the elephant...
It's mice for dinner.
Exactly. Or we starve.
Yeah.
I'd rather have antelope and rabbit hunters than elephant hunters. But knowing if you're going to have a few elephants in that pipeline, that's going to be a really long sales cycle, so you better have some other things in that sales cycle to bring that home. I see an awful lot of sunshine pumps in pipelines. Have everybody heard of sunshine pump? It's when the salesperson's like, yeah, we've got this great deal, and they just keep pumping sunshine up your butt because there's actually not much behind it. And so tracking these stats in the pipeline based on what the customer is doing instead of what the salesperson is doing, I think is really critical. Do you guys have metrics for how to think about that?
I'm sure you do.
We have so many metrics that we're tracking.
Yes,
now.
Of course you do.
We track sales from a salesperson perspective. We track dials per day, talk time, number of text calls. The back end of the pipe is where you get most of your deals. So if you're just focused on the front end of your pipe, which is a new lead, you're not going to be as successful. So we try to track those things, and we call the sunshine, we call that the liar's list. If you don't tell me about your liar's list, who's actually closed, because until they've closed, they're lying to you, so we need to get them to sign up. But yeah, absolutely, you have to stay on top of salespeople. Salespeople are a moving target. I'm one of them, so I know how, right. You keep them motivated, but yeah, you need to track stuff. But ultimately, all that really matters is, are you bringing in the deals or not? So. That's our primary goal. We work backwards from there. So, but that's marketing math in and of itself. So if you want to close $8,000 in sales, how many closes is that? And to get that many closes, how many leads do you have to work to get there? How many calls does it take to get a close? It takes us 21 calls. 21 calls is the optimum, number of contacts, and by calls, it could be an email, so it's an exchange.
Touch.
There needs to be 21 touches to close a deal, right? And we know that if we give our salespeople more than 60 leads, they actually close less deals because they have too many, so they can't call them enough, right? If we give them less than 40, they're not efficient, so they have extra time on their hands. So they're either calling too much or they're just twiddling their fingers. So you need to be between 40 and 60, so we target that. Then as our lead flow increases beyond 60, we have to hire another salesperson because otherwise we're wasting money on marketing because those leads won't close, you know. So that in and of itself is like, you know, a very predictable equation in terms of headcount.
How long did it take you to arrive at that?
Well, we're still working on it. We're 10 years in. So that's we're tweaking it every month, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in those early days when you were talking about those assumptions that you set, how
Yeah.
accurate were they in the first few months? And how far off were you, I guess?
We were conservative, so I would say be conservative. You know, always lean towards conservative, and we met or exceeded our expectations on our assumptions, which was good.
That's cool.
But that was when my dad and I were doing everything and making all the sales. So as we started to hire more salespeople, they weren't as good. So then it came down, right? And then eventually they got as good, right? But it took time. So here again, you're constantly adjusting it every month. And sometimes it's not improving, it's actually going the other way. So you can't lie to yourself. You have to actually put it in there and you have to adjust based on that.
That's the key. Don't lie to yourself, right?
Yeah.
Track it, whether it's going well or going great or going poorly.
Yeah.
Whether it's going well or great, keep
Right.
track of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about this in our prep calls about the small niche pools because like our business, we really target niche and we believe that focus is a key to the success of many small businesses. So that niche, for many of our clients, their niche focus might be only 500 companies. So the marketing math is a little different. And how much effort you have to put into getting those companies. You're not going to be filling a pipeline with 50,000 leads to get 40 or 50 deals coming out of it. So can you guys talk about that? And Charles, maybe you can talk a little bit about it from your perspective also, because it's larger deals, longer sales cycle, fewer customers, but the math still works. It's just different calculations.
Yeah, so again, I keep going back to the data that we have that defies some of the myths that we have in the marketplace, right? And one of the myths, for example, just in that is that shorter term acquisition of a customer is better than longer term. And I'd like to flip that over a little bit to think about your first objective to be predictable is to identify what we call a high value customer. So let me just talk through this just for a second because it gets into the alignment condition that drives all of this. There's only one customer that builds your business. There's only one type of customer. Every other type of customer destroys your business. You just can't see it. A high value customer is somebody that knows that you're the expert, back to niche, if that's the case, knows what you stand for, is willing to pay your price, is good on your people, in other words, understands your people, likes your culture, and ultimately will help you find other customers. That's a high value customer. They build your business. Each one of those builds it. But let's talk about the other customers. Some people call these early adopters, but early adopters can be around for 30 years if you'll let them. An early adopter wants something in return for taking a risk with you. So what they really are asking is that I want a discount in price because you're risky, you're small, you're not worthy of really our company. Or I want you to build something specifically for me, just for me, because I'm special and I'm an early adopter. And you do all those things, and what do? They're hard on your people. They disrespect you because you're lesser than them, you're building something for them. They don't promote you, and they leave you after all of those things. So a high-value customer is what you have to start with first to answer the question. And the reason I'm saying this is a high-value customer might take a long time to get. But if you're filling up the void of that length of time with low-value customers, you're never going to get enough high-value customers to build your business. So clearly, what JB and his company have discovered, if you're clearly part of our database, is they figured out what that target customer was probably years ago when you started building this, and found more of them, more like them, serviced them, priced to them. And I can guarantee you, because I know I did a little homework on the company, but most of your customers would love to work for you. there's a weird relationship between a high-value customer and the supplier, even of platform software. So the opposite is true for the low value. So it's not about just a niche or a small, narrow thing or a shorter cycle. It's about finding the customer that you want and building a business that can go get more of those without damaging your business in the process. That helps you become predictable. So I answer the question with determine who that customer is that's building your business first. Go find enough of them, understand how long it takes to get them, build the pipeline for it, have some patience until you get there, and then you'll build your business.
There's your magnifying glass.
Right.
Again, that metaphor of really focusing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of KPIs that we want to talk about in terms of the business. And so I'd like to have you talk about how you approach these KPIs and the assumptions that can go behind them. Let's start with cost of customer acquisition. You've kind of hinted at that, but there's more than just the lead cost.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a good segue to what you were just saying, because the CAC, which is cost per customer acquisition, should be compared to the LTV, which is lifetime value. Mm-hmm. So in other words, you can get a customer for pretty cheap, but if the lifetime value is really low, then that's not a good usage of your time. So even though the cost per customer acquisition might be high, if the lifetime value is really high, then it's worth it.
Write that down. Lifetime value is something you should be tracking in your business.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So if you have a monthly, service and the average customer pays 14 months, it'd be your monthly service times 14 is lifetime value, Mm-hmm. If it's not a monthly service, but they like the doctor, maybe the average chiropractic customer comes in once every 6 months or something like that, So you should be able to figure out, or at least make some assumptions around what the lifetime value would be for a good customer. Mm-hmm. And then it's worth paying a little more to get a good customer. So that's just the general thinking. So.
Yeah, and building a profile around what that ideal customer profile, we would call that,
Yeah.
looks like, which is not going to be something you're going to have immediately in your business, but you should be evaluating and judging the customer base all the time to figure that out by looking at that. So then the cost of, do you want to talk about cost of customer acquisition from a TrueSpace perspective?
Yeah, well, it's exactly what JB's talking about is understanding the value of that interaction with the customer. And something you said that's really profound, and we should make sure we don't lose this, but if it costs you more to find that customer and they create lifetime value, especially in a recurring model, spend the money. Mm-hmm. Versus spending a little bit of money to get a customer that carries the pieces.
Right.
And they're both customers. That's the weirdest part of the dynamic is they're both customers. I mean, those of you that were running businesses or working in the 1990s, it was the customer love decade, right? It was heresy to talk about any customer that you had. I mean, you remember these times? Love your customers. They're precious. They're better than everything, and don't lose any. Customers can kill your business if they're the wrong ones, right? If you have to acquire them and they're only around for a couple months in your model. So I didn't want to lose that concept because that's really an important part of our conversation
That's
around
huge.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really huge. And be prepared to fire customers. Don't be afraid to do that. Sometimes that's the best thing that can happen.
Yeah.
We call it NBC at Madwire, no bad customers. NBC, right? You try to notice that up front if you can.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, better. It's a lot cheaper to get rid of them up front.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cost of customer retention, another KPI you guys should be tracking. How do you track that one?
Well, it's churn for us. So we're always trying to improve churn. So there's a lot of different reasons why a customer churns.
So churn means losing a customer.
Losing a customer, yeah. And we're not, we have 4.7, but not 5. So there's 0.3 there where we either dropped the ball, and we most definitely have over the years. So you try to identify why did it not work out, what was the cause. Try to get customer feedback, customer surveys, actually call them, talk to them, try to understand their experience and try to identify why they're leaving. And if it's things you can improve on, you absolutely should. In some cases, you may just discover it's that type of customer that's not a good fit. So we need to adjust our sales process or marketing to no longer attract that type of customer. Mm-hmm. For example, we used to target limo drivers for marketing. Very bad customers. I hope nobody's in here is a limo driver. I mean, we don't really have limo drivers anymore, right? It's Uber. So
Yeah, right.
we don't market for Uber, right? So
So
limo drivers were just a very difficult vertical for us for whatever reason. It was just always, we lost every account. There was bad reviews. It was just a tough situation. So we just stopped marketing to them. We just turned that off, and we just targeted the other verticals. So in some cases, it helps you identify, when you're trying to improve churn, you identify the better customer or you identify your pain points, right? And losing, I saw a quote a long time ago, actually I heard it on TV when I was a kid, John Madden. Remember John Madden on football? I always remember his quote. He said, winning is the best deodorant because it covers up all the stink. So sometimes it's actually good when you lose. If you lose and you lose a bunch of customers, you get bad reviews, it forces you, and we've done this, I know from experience, it forces you to dig deeper to try to understand why that's happening. And then you identify the areas to fix, right? If everything just seems like it's great, you don't really dig in that deep. So,
yeah, success is a poor teacher, right?
Yeah.
How many people in here are part of service businesses, non-tech businesses, by show of hands? Are you part of a service business?
Non-tech.
Non-tech. So I asked that question to answer this question in maybe a different way. When we talk about retention, it seems just like commonsensical for a tech business, especially yours, that year-over-year retention of your use of your platform just makes so much sense financially, and of course it does. But we were able to study service businesses that don't have that potential. You don't have the renewable potential on an annual basis because you possibly were working on a project. You might be an accountant, a scientist, that kind of. But renewals is a completely different concept if you start thinking about what they can do for your business post-contract. And what we started to see in businesses that were scaling service organizations is they had a very intentional and deliberate project to keep customers, past customers, informed of what they were doing. So let me give you an example. You're a consulting firm and you're working on a project-by-project basis. And I finished the project with you and we moved basically on and I'm done with you. But what I've done now is I've actually brought you into the tribe, per se, and I'm constantly communicating with you of the things that we're doing with other customers. And so my renewal with you might actually may never happen, but the conversations that I have with you and the information that I inform you with helps you then help me build my business with the next set of people. So renewals for a service business is really expanding the community that you work and the network you have. It's a renewal idea. It's a renewal strategy that doesn't exist in the technology, or doesn't exist in the service firms, that exists in technology. And all of a sudden what we were doing is watching over that 4 years of study that literally 50 to 60% of leads were coming from past customers. So that is a renewal. That is a renewal concept for a service organization. So never think that you don't have that capability just because you don't have a software as a service or an app. So don't give up on it, because that actually is there and you earned the right to kind of create that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. So another key performance indicator that needs to be tracked constantly is what's it costing you to keep the customer and support them. It's not just about the retention at this point, it's actually delivery. And so you've got to be tracking that to make sure that your customer is actually profitable and you're getting a decent margin. So now I wish, now in thinking back, that I had put a consumer products company on this panel too, because that's a completely different metric. But let's talk about it from the perspectives, and I don't know if you have any consumer product companies or that you can talk about from that perspective, but what does it cost to support a customer? And how do you measure?
Cost of goods sold, basically. I mean, what you have to factor in all of the cost to support that customer, right? Or if it's a retail product, the cost of the product and those sorts of things. And obviously, we're all in business to make money, so you need to actually, there needs to be some kind of margin there, right? And then you're always trying to improve upon that. So for us, a big cost for us is just the labor. We have a lot of people, and that's our best product, really, is our people. So how do we become more efficient? How do we manage more revenue per person? So that's really what we track. Is revenue per person, that's efficiency. The more revenue you can drive through less people, the more efficient you are, right? And so it's about, if you can automate things, streamline things, templatize things, any kind of way to standardize things to be more efficient, to where you could do just a little bit more with less, the more profitable you are, obviously. So that's really the main metric that we track, is revenue per person. I think every business should track that one. And what you want to do is try to continually be improving that, not going the other way. So, and I think some really good targets for businesses would be like 300,000 a year, revenue per person. That would be We're not there yet, but that's a number that we've been targeting to try to get to. I think that's a pretty good level of efficiency when you look at companies. So,
And that's going to depend, if you're in a business that has lower waged people, you may not get to that metric. But there's metrics like that. We were talking about that in the last session, that there are benchmarks for businesses on things like this. So you want to talk about?
Do we have some consumer product companies in here by show of hands? Excellent. So direct to consumer, right? Company, good.
Okay.
I'll answer your question this way because it's the right place to study, oddly enough, that you brought it up almost accidentally. For all of us that are not maybe business to business, business customers, business to business consumer, whatever that is, the right mathematics is to go look at consumer relationships, because you have to define a consumer or a customer as a consumer as almost a unit of what you're actually providing that customer. You can define to a unit. So for example, if I'm selling cell phones, I have a named customer, but the cell phone is a unit. It is and I can look at all the costs to produce the unit over and above what it actually cost me to sell the unit. And that's what you want to have as a measure of a KPI over time. And we can do that in software service businesses. We can do it in large service organizations, large project companies, by defining what the unit is. Jamie and I had met with one of our member companies here right before this meeting. And one of their units is the number of literally photographs they take from a drone into a cell site. They have great big customers. So if you only looked at the cost of fulfilling that customer, you'd never get granular enough to understand if it's profitable. But if you looked at the customer of the hundreds and hundreds of photographs they take, and their unit cost is down to the single photo, I can look at I priced the photo, what it cost to produce the photo, what it cost to deliver the photo. In an aggregate, I can look at the customer and say it's profitable or not. But if you only look at one big customer at the customer side, you're never going to get there. And that's why consumer models are so instructional to us. Because the consumer model, you actually have to have a good or something you can package and deliver transactionally in that process. So it's a great way to look at all businesses mathematically, is to get down to that granular level. Let's use the cell phone for one more time. Every component for the very sophisticated cell phone companies that sell that kind of a product, they're down literally to the microchip level in cost in unit. What's it cost to literally have one of those microprocessors in that phone per customer? Is that cost of that microprocessor per customer going up or down? We all need to look at that granular level at some point in time in our business.
yeah. I would just add one thing on that, hinging off the churn piece that we track, that I think is good to think about, is the time to recover the CAC. So if the CAC,
that's the customer acquisition
cost to recover, if it costs you $1,000 to acquire a customer, how long does it take you to get that back? And not just in terms of revenue, but the profit piece. So if your margin's, 20% or whatever, and what is that on the monthly charge, if it's a monthly service or whatever, how many months does it take to recover the CAC? And those are things you should look at initially, because you may discover that it's not even a business that will be successful, because you'll never recover the CAC, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of profits. And so those are things to analyze as well, I think, in the assumptive phase.
Yeah, cost of customer acquisition is so essential in understanding what your business is going to look like. And by the way, if you have these metrics and you're tracking them, it makes it a whole lot easier to convince an investor that this is a viable business, even if you don't have the numbers on revenue that you necessarily would like to have yet. Okay, talk about that ideal customer profile again, like we were just talking about. And what did you do? Obviously, customer lifetime value is an aspect of it, but what other criteria do you look at to decide what that ideal customer profile should be, that we should be chasing?
I would develop some customer personas. What would the perfect customer look like to you? And then marketing is just about being where your customers are. So where are they spending their time, right? Where do they spend their time on social media? What do they follow? What do they watch? What do they listen to? Try to wrap your mind around that. Like, if you can be where your potential best customer is, that's where it starts.
Did you start with a specific target customer in mind when you first launched the business?
Just small business, so not real targeted in terms of verticals, just small business. So I would say any new business should sell anybody that they can. And what we always say is just do more of what's working and less of what's not over time. That works for anything. So just sell everyone, and then you'll discover based on data what works and what doesn't, and then you can refine and optimize from there. But don't be too picky initially, is my opinion. Like, take the deal, right? You'll learn in the process. Eventually you might discover what the best customer is, but you don't have to guess at that, I don't think. But if you have a good idea, you should start there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think defining the high, but again, I want to keep going to this high value customer. It starts way up in our model and alignment. So I only take a few minutes to tell this story, but because it's relevant. You can't define that customer until you define what you're going to be as a business. And this is where you get off the rails in alignment as a business, right? Because a customer can come in and shape your business. They can come in and buy your product or your service or whatever, and they change the shape of you because you become them if you're not careful, especially early stage. So this is a question that you can't really answer as a startup, but it's a question you have to be able to answer if you're a build business. That's this: why do you exist as a company? It's not a mission question, it's not a vision question, it's not what we do, but why do you exist? So I'll give you an example. We have Chris Kriegler is one of our members. I think, Andrew, you know him. He's run a business for 17 years that manages homeowners associations. So I didn't even know such a thing existed. Jamie and I met Chris. He's just such a great character, and I love working with him. But he spent a chunk of his life managing your homeowners association. He helps collect the cash, manage the board meetings, do all the administrivia, landscaping, all kinds of things, right? To the tune of $3 to $4 million a year. It's a good business. It has having struggled growing. And we'd ask him that kind of question: who's your target customer, and that kind of thing. And each time we'd ask him, why do you exist? Because that's a big part of our structure. He'd come back and say, well, we manage this, or we do this. This is what we do. We manage homeowners association. We reduce costs. We streamline things. We're a creditor. We actually collect the money from the homeowners association and pay bills. And I go, no, why do you actually exist as a firm? And this will help answer that question. And we worked through this multiple cycles of this with Chris. And he finally determined that he exists to do this. And it goes this way: Cat Management, which is the name of the company, exists to inspire homeowners to become more financially and environmentally sustainable. Nowhere in there does it say he manages homeowners associations. Nowhere in there does it say what he does. It says why he exists. And so it's a directional answer to a very important question that now puts him on a vector with his business to go find homeowners associations that fit why he exists. His model of no growth came this way. He was managing high-rise apartments, golf course communities, all these places that don't fit with this financially and sustainable existence question or answer that he had. So where did he target? He targeted older multifamily facilities that needed sustainability upgrades. He targeted baby boomers that were looking to figure out how to become more financially sustainable, that would have moved into multifamily facilities, and places that had a lot of grass and environmental needs for maintenance. And he's growing his business now at literally a big clip. So to answer your question, to find out who your customer is and who that is, you have to first go back and say, why do I exist as a business? Not what do I do, but why do I exist? And that vector will help you answer those questions. It'll tell you who you want as a customer. Because what happens over time, over a decade, is that if we evolve with more and more customers coming in, they shape us versus us shaping them. And that's what's happened. So to answer your question, I think you got to get back to that level if you're struggling with that, with the answer today, if you can't figure out who your customer is.
We're going to probably mess that up in our next session when we talk about how to create cash flow without having an investor.
that cash thing.
Yeah, I know.
We're not in that, right? We're out of that.
Yeah, no, we're not in this. That's not my wheelhouse.
So I'm going to ask one more question. What are the unintended consequences of not being predictable?
The unintended consequences of not being predictable. It's probably like driving in the fog. You don't really know what's out ahead. I think you need a roadmap You need to have some sort of a guide. Doesn't mean that that's direct necessarily the way you go, but having a plan helps you at least move that way, and then you can always adjust. So that's, we adjust our plans all the time. We add new products, services, didn't work out, we stopped doing it, we do it differently, but you always start with a guide. If you don't have a guide, then you're not predictable because you don't even know where you're going. Like, you can't predict where you're going if you don't know where you're going. Mm-hmm. So I guess, it's always good to back in, but I would say, just to, since we're wrapping up, some feedback I would have is that I've learned over the years, which I make mistakes every day, but you can have an A+ plan and an A+ strategy, but if you have C+ leadership and C+ culture, you're going to get a C+ result. So it starts with leadership and culture. I think if we're all after elite performance, you have to understand what elite performance is. Those are your primary KPIs. What would be considered elite, right? Then you have to reverse engineer what would take to get there. But at the highest level, to have elite performance, you have to have elite leadership, because elite leadership drives championship culture, and championship culture drives elite execution, and elite execution drives elite performance. But you can't have elite performance without elite execution, and you can't have elite execution without championship culture, and you can't have championship culture without elite leadership. So while you need an unbelievable plan and strategy to begin with, it will be all for naught if you don't have the best leadership, culture, and execution to achieve it. So I would definitely always keep that in mind too. So we've had a lot of great plans and new departments and stuff, and the plan was good, but the leadership there wasn't maybe as good. And so in some cases it didn't need to be adjusted in terms of the plan, we just needed to adjust the leadership, and it fixed it. So just another way to think about it.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
Number one unintended consequence of unpredictability is loss of credibility. And let's just play that out for a minute. You're credible instantly with most new hires. You're pretty credible with new investors. But as that erodes, the erosion of it is that you can't predict. You're basically using poor assumptions, and you're not planning well, and you're not predictable. And it plays out in huge ways over the course of time, where people don't trust your forecasts. They don't trust you. It's hard to find new talent. It's hard to get people to really align, especially if it's an elite culture, like you say. Mm-hmm. And even customers feel it if you're not predictable. So credibility, it's one of our flows in our model. We measure credibility at the flow level for leadership. You can fix this. So it's not like it's done, like, once you're not credible, you can come back. But it takes a lot of work. And if we could stop some of that or ebb some of that today through these kind of conversations, you can hold your credibility. But that's the thing as a leader, that when you let that go by being bravado in your planning, or letting somebody else tell you what your future is going to look like, especially your financial future, you're betting your credibility by doing that. So that to me, that's number one.
Yeah. Okay, we have time for one question. Sorry, guys. And we can keep this going a little bit during. You guys will you both be here during the networking hour after the next keynote?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, so you will have a chance to ask them questions. But go ahead. Who's got the best question in the house?
Nobody wants to ask that.
I know. No pressure. Go ahead.
All right. So my question is the business model you choose, does that dictate your predictability over time? And also, if you are also either bootstrapping or getting venture funding, does that also dictate the level of predictability you need to scale?
That was one of the best.
That was a really good question.
Actually, there were 3 questions there. I just want to.
We'll let that go.
He's cheating just a little bit. I'll answer that from my perspective, and then you can fill in. Yes, there are better business models relative to predictability, but I would not base my business on this answer. Any type of recurring revenue model is going to be substantially easier to forecast than ones that are non-recurring. It's just the way this mathematics, right? It's predictability. But some of the best businesses we've seen built and scale don't have that predictability model on the revenue side. They have the predictability model on the execution side. So just remember that's a big part. And the second question was, Oh, come on.
VC versus bootstrap.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
VC was, I know JB bootstrapped it and killed it, but like VC, because I know VCs, like, they have milestones, like this milestone, you hit this, you don't hit this, we will stop, like, funding you. So
Yeah.
does that, like, does the level of, like, operational excellence and predictability, how predictable do you have to be?
I'll answer it this way up from a VC side, since it was a big part of our study group, without being pejorative to investors. So I'll just put that out there as a disclaimer.
Yeah, Denny's here, so.
The hardest thing to be predictable around is when somebody else creates your model. And I would say nearly 100% of all investors, if they're institutional investors or professional investors, will create the model for you. They have MBAs, they have all these smart people, they have modeling techniques, and they'll come back and say, here's what we think your model is going to do, and that's why we invest. And we're going to value your business based on this model. What we see there is how difficult it is for an entrepreneur to follow somebody else's plans, because what's built in that model are the assumptions of your business. You've got to own those assumptions. The reason bootstrapping works somewhat better, based on the data we have, is that you own those assumptions. You did. They're yours, right? They're nobody else's. You have to live with them, good or bad, and you can adjust to them. But if I would have given you those assumptions, and those really aren't the assumptions you're running your business with, it's really hard in those few years to be predictable. So now the last thing I'll tell you, is, I realize we're a little late, but if there's enough money, it'll buy time for you to get predictable. So that's the way a lot of the California funding is happening today, is I'm just going to throw so much cash at you that you'll get that crap figured out over the next couple of years, and you can come back to the zone and hopefully become predictable. But most of us don't live in that world.
But that's not going to help you as a founder if you're trying to create value in your own investment, because if you don't have a predictable business, they might invest in your business, but you're not going to keep any of it, or you're going to keep such a tiny amount of it. And having gone through that, I mean, we raised an oversubscribed round of funding. We were literally turning away investors for our Series A, but we didn't keep very much of it because we did not have a predictable business. So predictability creates enterprise value, and enterprise value creates value for you when you go get funding. I'm really against getting funding too early in the business. JB, how big, what was your revenue when you went for funding for the first time?
We were 5 years in at that point. I want to say our revenue at that point was, Matt's back there, he probably remembers, but 15.
15, okay.
15 million.
I love it.
Yeah,
so you can
15 million.
bootstrap to 15 million. You know, you don't assume that you need to bootstrap to definitely don't assume that you want to get funding to get to $1 million, unless you're in a business like we're going to have come up next, where she needed it in order to manufacture. There's different business models that do require funding, but don't go for funding too early and be predictable. Thank you so much, you guys. This was fantastic. Thank you.